Hello, and welcome to this First Friday Google Hangout on schools, essential building blocks in a culture of health. I'm Susan Dentzer, Senior Policy Advisor to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Delighted to be serving as your moderator today. These First Friday Google Hangouts are one way that the Foundation seeks to keep people informed about Foundation priorities, about the people at the Foundation who carry them out, and about the grantees and other stakeholders who are joining us in this important work. Today our focus is on the holistic set of ingredients that go into building and making schools, I should say, an important basis of health. These include important social and emotional learning components that complement healthy food and activity levels in schools and help all of us build a culture of health, starting with the nation's children. As today's Hangout proceeds, we hope that you'll tweet us your questions. The address, as you see on the upper right-hand corner of your screen, is hashtag RWJF 1STFry, that's as in First Friday. We have three terrific speakers with us today who will be discussing some of the who's, how's, and why's of healthy schools. Let me introduce them now. First, we're delighted to have with us Jennifer Nandu. She's a program officer at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and Jennifer focuses on grant-making activities that promote social and environmental changes to help children, families, and communities engage in healthy practices. We're also very happy to have with us Mark Brackett, who's director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. He's also a senior research scientist in psychology and a faculty fellow in the Edward Ziegler Center in Child Development and Social Policy at Yale. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has supported the Yale Center to conduct a survey of the emotional status of students in the United States. And finally, we're also happy to be joined by Michael Halpert. He's principal of Baltz Elementary School, which is a kindergarten through 8th grade school in Phoenix, Arizona. Baltz Elementary participates in two Robert Wood Johnson Foundation-funded programs. First is the Alliance for a Healthier Generations Healthy Schools program, and the second is PlayWorks. PlayWorks is a nonprofit organization that assists schools like Baltz Elementary in creating safe and healthy recess and related activities for children. So Jennifer, we'd like to begin with you today. Tell us about the Foundation's work to encourage this holistic approach to health in schools and how that connects with the broader focus of the Foundation on building a culture of health.
Thank you, Susan, for your kind introduction. Again, I'm Jennifer Nandu with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and a program officer here. And first, I just wanted to say happy back to school week. It's one of my favorite times of the year because it's a time of year when my social media feeds are filled with kids going back to school, posts and pictures. And it's a time when parents are sharing these critical points in children's lives. And I think, you know, that's the first point, which is the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has had a long history of investing in schools because we understand that educational outcomes are critical to lifelong health. You know, there's more and more evidence piling up that the health and well-being of students, of children when they're in the classroom is critical to their optimal learning experience. There was just a study out by some researchers at Penn State and Duke University that showed, for instance, that social and emotional well-being of students, their social competence, is a huge predictor of lifelong well-being and health. And we all know that a child who has an empty belly or who hasn't participated in the physical activity that they need may not have the means to concentrate in the classroom and really perform at the highest levels. But as we move down this journey and think about how we build a culture of health, we're seeing it as more and more important to think about health in a more integrated and holistic way. I come from a family of educators and teachers. My auntie, who's in Connecticut, is bearing the fruits of your good work, Mark, And she talks about the fact that her students carry more into the classroom than just their backpacks, and that it is so important to underpin their learning with the things that promote holistically the mental, physical, their social and emotional well-being, so that they're able to learn and to make the most out of their educational opportunities. I hear from teachers weekly who say, look, you can't tell me to add on 10 programs to my school. These can't just be add-ons. These must be efforts that are integrated into our school that allow us to do the best, provide the best education that we can. And so moving forward, the foundation is really thinking about how, if we want to make a healthy school environment the norm and not the exception in schools all around the United States, that we must make our investments, we must do our branding in ways that it's one ask for schools, that it's an integrated ask, and that we're talking about providing a foundation and components of health that are about giving kids what they need in order to do well in schools. And so, you know, I just wrap up and say that now is the time. We hear every day that we're at a critical moment in the conversation about education in the United States, and we need to seize on this moment. And so we're thinking about what are the strategies that we can employ so that people can collectively come together and build that demand to make sure that the healthy school environment is one that supports students, their teachers, and other educators across the school system. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. So, Mark, you have a big fan in the form of Jennifer's aunt up in Connecticut. Tell us more about the work that you're undertaking at the Yale Center and how the whole issue of social and emotional learning in schools is sustained by the work of the center to really help produce these healthy environments.
Sure, thank you, Susan. I think the first thing that I'd like to say is, you know, our center, which is called the Center for Emotional Intelligence, our goal is to use the power of emotional intelligence to create a more healthy, effective, and compassionate society. Because what we know from our research is that emotions matter for 5 primary reasons. The first is attention, memory, and learning. That how a student feels each day in school will drive his or her attentional capacity. So if that student is coming in feeling fear, like I did as a kid when I was in middle school, for example, my brain was operating in survival mode. It wasn't operating in learning mode. I was more concerned with who's going to be my friend, am I going to get from class A to class B without getting hurt, how am I going to get home safely. So we know that emotions drive our attentional capacity, and that leads to learning. The second is our relationships, that emotions drive the quality of our relationships, that how people feel and how they display their feelings drives people to either approach or avoid them, right? Furrowed eyebrows, a disgusting looking face, or a face that's showing a lot of anger is basically saying, stay away. That's saying, I'm approachable, I'm here for you. The third is decision making and judgment, that we know that emotions drive the way we think about things. So for example, among teachers I've done research which shows that how they feel, their mood while grading influences student outcomes. That a teacher who is in a bad mood will give 1 to 2 full grade lower grades to a student. So we know that emotions drive our judgments and decision making. The fourth is mental health and physical health. That how we feel will influence obviously our well-being. You know, anxiety and depression, by way of example, are in many ways failures in self-regulation. And the final piece is just everyday effectiveness. That to be successful, to be creative, we are going to fail, we're going to get negative feedback, we are going to be disappointed in our progress, and unless we have the support systems and the strategies to deal with those disappointments and failures and setbacks, we're not going to be able to achieve our goals. So that whole idea of emotions matter has led us into building a theory of emotional intelligence. So what do you do with your feelings? And there are 5 skills that we use to describe emotional intelligence. The first is recognizing emotion in the face, body voice, body language. The second is the understanding of emotion. Why am I having this feeling of anger? Why am I frustrated? Why am I anxious? The third is labeling. Do I have the vocabulary? For example, am I overwhelmed or am I anxious? Am I disappointed or am I hopeless? Am I happy or am I ecstatic? The fourth is expressing emotions, knowing how and when to express emotions in different contexts. And this includes culture. We say you can't be emotionally intelligent unless you're culturally responsive, because there are rules that are different across cultures, and we need to be scientists as opposed to judges. And the fifth skill is the regulation of emotion. So what are the strategies, both cognitive and behavioral, that we use to help us navigate our emotional lives and achieve our goals? And that whole idea of emotional intelligence has led us into developing a system for schools to integrate these concepts. And that program is called RULER. And RULER is an acronym for those skills of emotional intelligence. RULER is an evidence-based approach to teaching social and emotional learning that's in about 1,000 schools across the nation. And what we've learned over the last 20 years is that it needs to be a systemic approach. I started off in this field only caring about kids because I wanted to save myself and all the other kids who were suffering. And what I realized was that that was misguided. That what was necessary was that the adults who were involved in the education of these children needed to develop the skills first for themselves and also the skills to teach them before students could get this information. And then I realized that leaders of schools needed to have these skills because they were the ones who were the role models for the teachers. And they also were the ones who had the budgets and the people who made something sustainable or not. And then I realized that families have to be trained. So we started developing a family approach. And essentially what we've learned now over the last 20 years is that everybody with a face has to be trained. So when we work with a school district, we work with superintendents, we work with support staff, we work with teachers, we work with families, and of course we want to get to the students as well. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, and we do want to come back to you and learn more about how some particular schools you've assisted through the RULER program have been able to really turn things around in their school environment.
Be delighted.
Now, we'd like to go to you next, Michael Halpert, to talk about what's going on at Balls Elementary. As we mentioned, it's a K-8 school in Phoenix. Tell us more about the school and tell us about how you're approaching some of these various ways of making the school environment as healthy as possible.
Absolutely. First, I'd like to say it's a pleasure to be a part of this team. It's very nice to hear such similar philosophies that we hold within our school. I guess as a school, we believe that we are the place where all these pieces come together, and it's our job to make sure that those pieces are put together in a positive way that, like many people said, are definitely systemic, but then are implemented by the people within the school. So a little bit about Ball School. In addition to it just being a fantastic place to be and wonderful children and a great city, we're a school of 875 students represented by multiple ethnicities and cultures. 99% of our students receive free or reduced lunch from the federal government. And with that being said, everything we do, we believe, has to be strategic, intentional, and child-centered. So it's very nice to be able to share some of the philosophies that we have. I would say one of the most landmark pieces to where we developed our philosophies was based on looking at student achievement, and not just student achievement, but what comes prior to that, meaning instructional strategies. We spent years focusing overly on those strategies, and over the last few years we began to see that there were challenges that were impeding us from being fully embedded in that area. So as we started to look through, we've always had counselors, we've always had an idea that we need to take care of kids. Like I believe Jennifer said, they were acting. So we began an investigation of the idea of really looking at what the pieces are that either make a child more present or have a deeper ability to learn. And we came up with a little model that we broke it down into nutrition and physical health. We broke it down into mental health, and we broke it down into student learning. And in the past, we kind of looked at those pieces in isolation, and we believe that the change occurred when we began to see them as interconnected. These three pieces are by no means independent of each other. They are 100% dependent on each other. We believe that if one area is off, all other areas will follow. That's just our philosophy. So I guess to kind of bring a second point, we can't do this on our own. The individual students has represented the different components of what actually shows up in the school. And it really boils down to, I believe, the connection that happens between those two people. So we have plenty of programs out in the world to choose from. But if we don't believe that it's the program itself that's going to make the difference, what we believe at Ball School is it's the philosophy alignment between the program and the school that will make the key power difference within our students. So what we've done is we've looked to our district, we've looked to our community and our program, and what we've done is we've had to take our philosophy, match it to the individuals or programming philosophies in our community, and not just bring them into the school as in after school or an event or an assembly, but how do they make this as we are as a school? It's tier one. It's what every child needs. Because a child is a child, and a child is a student. So we've had wonderful partners that have come in, like you said earlier, the Healthy School Program, where I guess I would say it's not just about nutrition, it's not just about physical activity. It's really about a healthy school culture. It's about a healthy child. Whether it's through the teachers that have received training, whether it's through us sitting down with the people who lead these programs, we sit and we meld our belief systems together so it becomes who we are. Programs like Playrooms, I also mentioned, took an area of our school that was relatively about recess. What we did is we took it as an opportunity to learn how to teach our kids social conflict resolution. We learned to have leadership within our school. And again, it wasn't just about what happened at recess. It's something we bring into every day in classroom. Our teachers live Playworks. Our teachers live Healthy School programs. So another piece that we really feel that made a difference is making sure we understand a child as a whole child. Is something we've done with the value of the Sound United Way and Johns Hopkins University, where what we're looking to use is data measures to be able to predict outcomes such as high school graduation. Also areas such as connectedness, grit factor, connections with teachers, students, connection with learning. What's the purpose of learning and why do I do it? It's not the old school value because I told you so anymore. It needs to be intentional. So these pieces have literally come into our school and become part of who we are. So through this work, we've not just left it at that. We have instructional data more than we can handle sometimes. But we began to look at if we're really going to have these three areas that are going to make a difference, how are we going to use the data to help us make sure we're on the right track? So one of the things, such as the early warning indicators, is something that we use both prediction in high school, but we also use resiliency surveys. And then that data is what we as our team of the people in the school sit down and use that data to build an infrastructure within the school to make sure that every child needs, not just in the area of teaching and learning, but in mental health, nutrition, and physical activity. And then most importantly, I would say the summer really means that there's a commitment from our superintendent, our district, and the front office. Teachers are the most important people. They are with kids every day. I would say that's pretty much what I'd say our philosophy is, but it's something it's not just what we do, but we believe it's what we live with every decision we make.
Great. Well, thanks to all three of you, and I want to encourage our participating audience today to go ahead and tweet us your questions for these three speakers. Again, that address is hashtag RWJF, as in Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, 1ST-FRI, F-R-I, as in First Friday. Well, what we've heard from the three of you is so important. First of all, from Jennifer, underscoring the point that educational outcomes really are linked to lifelong health, that to get to those improved outcomes, we really do need a holistic approach. That is what the foundation has concluded and is increasingly moving toward, to make, as she described, an integrated ask of schools to help build a culture of health in all these different ways that we've been talking about. And as you said, we're really at a critical moment in this country in our efforts to really ramp up the ability of schools to contribute to that culture of health. As we heard from Mark, emotions matter. They drive our ability to learn, they drive our relationships, our decision-making capacity, our mental and physical health, and frankly our everyday effectiveness in everything we do, from teaching or learning in the case of students. As we also heard from Mark, all these capabilities in emotional intelligence can be taught through 5 different skills that fall very neatly into that ruler acronym that he mentioned. And when all of that is integrated into a systemic approach in schools, from adults on down, the principal, the teachers, the families, and the students themselves, some wonderful things can truly happen. And then as we heard from Michael Halpert, this really comes together on the ground at Balls Elementary, as well as in so many schools across the country. These pieces coming together, really a strategic, intentional approach, as he said, to bring these various threads together to build the culture of health in schools. And I love in particular, Michael, that example of you looking at ways to use data to predict the potential of adverse consequences, dropouts at the high school level, and try to head that off at the pass by working with students in mentoring relationships within Balls Elementary to build those connections tighter, really address those social and emotional learning components that, that you all have been speaking about. With that, I'd like to come back and go back to you, Mark, and ask you to talk about some of the results that you've seen in the 1,000 or so schools that have adopted the ruler program. What kind of benefits ensue from that, and what are the challenges of schools in taking on the ruler approach?
Sure. I think we'll start with the challenges, just because I'd like to just get that out of the way, because we're going to overcome all those challenges in the next year. The primary challenge is implementation, right? Is building the systems, the supports that you need to really make this happen. Ruler is an approach, not a program, so we don't sell a kit. It's much more about the professional development and the learning of strategies and tools that get infused into the immune system or the fabric of a school. And so what we've seen from our research in both implementation studies and randomized controlled trials is that ruler has the ability to influence multiple outcomes, right? The first is the student well-being piece, that kids have less anxiety, they have less depression. The second is this area of relationships. They have better quality relationships, they're less likely to engage in bullying and aggressive behavior. The third is the academic piece, where students in schools that adopt these approaches just do better academically. And the fourth is in school climate. So using observational tools in schools that have adopted and have not adopted this approach, we can show over time that teachers in schools that take on these practices engage in teaching in a way that's different. They're more sensitive to their students' needs. They display more positive emotions in the classroom. And they just by far are more engaging. So it's pretty clear both from ruler and as well as other approaches to teaching social and emotional learning that doing this has great benefits for kids and their teachers.
How do you measure things like student well-being, for example? Obviously, test scores could be an indicator of educational performance. What about some of these other softer areas, if you will, like emotional well-being?
So there's lots of different ways of assessing these variables. You can do through student reports, right? How are you feeling today in school? Today, for example, I'm teaching my course at Yale. Every day, my students fill out an emotion survey that I'll be tracking their moods for the entire semester to show the impact, right, on their performance. In schools, we can do student surveys, we can do teacher surveys, parent surveys. We can also do what I think is really critically important, is ability-based testing. So testing kids, for example, what their actual knowledge is and ability is to regulate emotions. So the difference is, one, I think I'm good at handling my emotions, The next is, when I'm feeling angry, I use these strategies. And I know these strategies. And what my research shows is that the ability assessment just has better validity than the self-report assessment.
Let me go to you again, Michael Halpert, and ask you, what kinds of changes have you seen within your school as you've adopted some of the various approaches? And do you see the kind of benefits that Mark described ensue from things like the mentoring program that you described and some of the other approaches that you've undertaken?
Sure. I would say the first thing that comes to mind is just the feel of the school. I believe it starts from the moment you walk in the front door. There's a different feel on campus. I think then when you talk about the students, that when you're solely concerned about an academic score or a test, they feel that. And I think that the teachers are the ones who, because they're working directly with students, they feel that as well. That's that it gets established in the classroom. So we have teachers, we have people here who want to help children. So it doesn't just pertain to the test score, but it's also trying to understand the other pieces such as the mental, physical, and nutrition. And we know that if those pieces aren't there, they're not present. And when a child is present in the room, they're a better learner. So it's a synergistic effect. We feel that it starts with the district, it moves to the administration, it moves down to the teachers, and all the way back up to what the students feel on a day-to-day basis. So it's something you can't fix or create. It's what getting the things that may interfere with being able to just sit down, relax, and do things in the classroom.
You mentioned, of course, that Balls Elementary is in a somewhat poor district. You've got the vast majority, almost all of your students on free or reduced lunch programs. Do you have the resources necessary to undertake these kinds of approaches? And how much of a challenge is a lack of financial resources in conducting any of these activities?
So at this point, I would say there's never enough resources to truly do what we want to do. I think it comes to a set of priorities. I think at some point it's a stand that our district takes. It's a stand that we, as we put our budget and execute for the year, that we make sure that we align that budget to our values, which are part of our school philosophy. So, and then to say that means we can't do something by ourselves either. So we really seek to look for partnerships. Our superintendent is fantastic in putting things across our plate and letting us choose from a multitude of programs, and in that way we get to choose what philosophies match with ours, and then we make it work. Somehow we make it part of what a stand that we will make happen because we're committed to it.
Jennifer, I want to come back to you and draw you out a little bit more on the Foundation's move to a more holistic approach, as you said. And I believe you said that schools now feel so much coming at them, a program here, a program there, and as all of our speakers have said, it's not just about an accumulation of programs, it's about really infusing into, as Mark Brackett put it, the immune system of the school, what the fundamental approaches are going to be to social and emotional learning. Tell us how you think that's going to play out in the kinds of grant-making activities that the Foundation will be engaging in going forward.
Sure, and I should just start with saying, you know, we think that one aspect of a more integrated approach is critical, and that's because schools are really anchor institutions for communities, right? They are often at the center of community. When we think about schools, we may think about the school day in the classroom, and that, but serve as so much more. They're often the places where health fairs are held, or when people, or a place where people turn to when there's disaster within community. There's so many community events that take place at schools. And for our kids, they're not only learning environments, but they're often the places outside of the home where our values and principles of society are transferred to children through their educational process. So saying all of that, we think it's imperative that we find approaches to embed health in schools. And, I think it plays out in sort of a couple of specific ways. One is that we believe that our focus has to be systemic and environmental, and that there are critical ways in which we must invest in the types of policy advancement and policy and advocacy work that helps create both the financial resources for schools to be able to implement in a more integrated way, and puts the policies in place that really integrate health into school settings or enable schools to meet the needs of their children. I think we also see our future in grant making as one that invests in strategic communications. So for all the voices who are telling us that there is a need out there to start thinking about how we transform our school environments, what is the umbrella vision and the communication strategies that can help advance this work? And then I would also say that we see ourselves continuing to invest in research. Some of what we're supporting right now is the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence to uplift the emotional status of students in this country, but also to translate that research into really strong policies and practices that folks can adopt, because we really need to find the type of research that supports people where the rubber meets the road, and where schools are trying to find effective evidence-based ways to address the needs of their children. So I think those are some of the ways that we see ourselves contributing to this space moving forward.
Well, thanks so much. We're going to go now to some questions that have come in via Twitter. One is from Dick Bender, who writes from the National Education Association, Healthy Futures. He asks, how do you deal with staff who discount the value of emotional intelligence? I'd love to hear both Mark and Michael address that. Mark, maybe you could start with how schools in general may have to cope with that issue. And then, Michael, if you've got any instances of that at your school that you've had to overcome, it would be great if you would share that as well. Mark, first to you.
Okay. So I think oftentimes people focus on the 1, 2, 3, 4 people who are not ready, or who may not feel this is important, and they don't focus on the 80, 90 people who are. So I think it's a mindset in terms of, I've got 3 people, they hate this, and it's like, okay, but you got 57 who love it. Let's work with them. But I have one school leader that reminds me of Michael, who I want to just speak about for a moment, because when she was my student years ago, she now is running a school, and she knew this was the most important thing in her school to really make a difference in the kids' lives. And she went in as a leader, and she just said, I've bought the emotional intelligence bus, and I'm actually driving the bus. And I know some of you might be, walking and running along the bus, looking and saying, oh, I don't know what I'm trying to get on the bus. And some of you may get on the bus and sit in the back of the bus. Some of you are actually sitting in the front row, and you're driving with me, but you can't get in front of my bus. And I actually really appreciate leaders who are leaders, and they say, this is what we need, the data are there, right? There's no argument anymore. Like, it's an opinion that someone has in terms of not wanting to do this, but the data support from all walks of life that this makes a huge difference in kids' lives. So I think oftentimes it's, number one, helping the adult become a little unstuck, because oftentimes the people who are against this or feel threatened by it are the people who actually need it the most. And then second is leadership in terms of creating the culture that is going to be the best for your students. And I think what happens is 2 things. One, the people who are stuck become slightly unstuck over time, or they select themselves out of that particular school building.
Michael
stop
Halper,
there.
have you run into situations where you've had some so-called stuck staff? Michael, I'm not sure you can hear me. Have you run into any comparable situations?
So we have, but I would say it kind of starts much earlier, very similar to what Mark is saying. I think it starts earlier than focusing on those things. I think it initiates from the leadership or a movement. I feel as if it starts with the sales approach. I feel it's an enrollment into something bigger than what we do on a day-to-day basis. It's beyond a test score. It's about children. So the nice part is the majority of the teachers who enter the field, and I say majority, and I would say vast majority, are here not for the content, they're here for the children. So that's the initial part of it. I would say we look into another portion of that group, very much like Mark said, is that it's part understanding. We feel like if there's somebody who is not enrolled in this movement, number one, it's my job not to sell it, but in a way to sell it, to show them the importance of it and the values that could be achieved from it. And if there's anybody that's not following through or following along with the rest of the school or don't have that understanding, I agree with the bus scenario. It does come to the point where at some point you have to open that door at the bus and say, do you want to stay with us? Do you not want to stay with us? And I'm very proud to tell you that there's an amazing feel within our campus, and it's not me. I'm probably the least important person in this process. It's the people who stand in front of children and model it and show the understanding that we as a team and as a school represent from our philosophy. So it's the door on the bus, I guess I would say.
Another tweeter commented about the role that communities need to play in supporting schools to build a culture of health, even down to such things as ensuring that kids have safe routes to follow to get to schools. Now, Michael Halper, you mentioned particularly reaching out to the community to engage them. How important has that been, and what have been the most effective ways of tapping into community desires to help out, resources to help out, etc.?
I would say the connection with our community, meaning if we passively sit and wait for things to come to us, we could be waiting for a long time. So we have many people in the school that know we can't do this on our own. So there's often times we're approached from organizations that become, to some degree, the lifeblood of some of our philosophies. And then it's also us getting up and going out to find out what's missing and looking for those and evaluating programs which we feel are those missing pieces, not always by what we think or feel, but what data we have that's showing. So again, to go back through the Value of the Sun United Way and Johns Hopkins work that we're doing, learning a little bit about resiliency and connectedness and understanding that these predictors, there's predictors of high school success, and then there's the characteristics that you will drive you to that, through that path. So what we try to do is to look at the path and necessarily put things in place for kids that will result in that high school achievement and college achievement. But without our partners being open and asking us if we need something, or us being open to reach out and ask for something, we stay in isolation. And we all know it's not one person or a group of people that can change the school. So it's an all in or nothing thing.
Jen, do you want to speak briefly to that question also, the role of the broader community in supporting schools?
Sure, and just going back to your last point, you know, I would just say, as we've had the conversation with hundreds of people over this past year about what we should be doing in schools, what's interesting is we don't, as Mark said, the data is out there, and most people don't have resistance to the data. I think they really see a need for these issues, but we do need to find practical ways to make sure that folks in their day-to-day lives can implement this work, and that the policies that are within that support schools really in fact support this way forward. And so, you know, when it comes to community, I think as a general principle of how we think we can help to build a culture of health with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, we believe that community is a vital part of the school's conversation. that schools as often a community institution, that it's important that there be a two-way dialogue between communities and their schools. And so we see it as part of the ingredients, that it's going to be important, that as we pursue strategies, that again, that it's not just about a program, but about communities being integrated. Because ultimately, while schools have so much that they can do to underpin the success of students, that needs to be reinforced when those students go back home, when they go back to their parents and their caregivers, and when they go out into the community. It has to be threaded throughout their total environments.
Mark, I think you have a couple of examples to cite about instances where communities really have been supportive of these school-based activities.
I'll just give you one, I think, that stood out, which was a school district, a large district that I've been working with, decided to do a community training. So they invited all the local businesses, from the coffee shops to the dry cleaners to Fortune 500 companies, and literally 700 people showed up one evening in this district, and we did a training for all of these corporations and local businesses. And it became a whole thing in the newspaper. This town is going to be the first emotionally intelligent town in Connecticut. And I went to a coffee shop. Oh my God, you're the EI guy. I went to the dry cleaners. Oh my God, you get your free dry cleaning. And it actually was just this, for me, it was quite funny because the entire town had sort of like picked up on this, and we have this tool called the mood meter, and everybody's plotting themselves on the mood meter. So I think schools can be very creative, in terms of reaching out to the community and obviously embracing this work. And what I've learned is that when you have families talking about it, so a good example, a very quick one, was in New York City. One of our top schools is called the Thurgood Marshall School in Harlem, and the parent training there has gone fantastic. And the principal of the school, and actually one of our trainers, is in the local deli, and they're behind someone who they're not really knowing who it is, but she's having a conversation with the man who's making her the coffee. And she's like, I'm just letting you know, you're putting me in the red. And that's a part of our language for our mood meter. And the principal's like, yes, she's using it. Now he's going to know what it is. And you can see how over time you can get these ideas to permeate a community, which is what we all want.
And get a lot of people on the bus, metaphorically speaking, in the process. That's terrific. And I think, Michael Howard, you have an example, if I'm not mistaken, at your school involving the Boys and Girls Clubs coming into the school. Tell us quickly about that.
Yeah, absolutely. This past year, we spent the culmination of a relationship with the Boys and Girls Club came to life. So literally using our gym as the midpoint, Boys and Girls Club built a club onto our school. And it became the question of whether or not there's a school and there's a Boys and Girls Club, or it becomes a community of what we all stand for. So really bridging that connection with the work of the Boys and Girls Club, who have been fantastic and just so appreciative that they're here. But when it's us together, it's no longer what happens during the day and what happens at night. An example of bringing Playworks back in, Playworks came to talk about just some of the work, looking at some of the data, and it led to this conversation of what would it be like if the Boys and Girls Club members or staff members executed or lived the Playworks language and life, how powerful that would be compared to living one way in the afternoon and going to the Boys and Girls Club. But what if it was part of their community? Talk about the effect of a community, or all hands on board of what the differences that would make. So no longer do we just have a Boys and Girls Club and a school. We have a learning campus now, and we just share those values together. So it's been pretty powerful to watch.
Great. Well, we have just about a minute left, and I want to go very quickly to you, Mark Brackett, and ask you, for schools that want to build this culture of health and develop emotional intelligence, what are some resources they can take advantage of on your website or elsewhere?
Sure, I think the first step is just go through our website, and obviously we're happy to connect with anyone who's interested. And the website is very simple. It's EI, as in emotional intelligence, .yale, YALE.edu.
Great, and there's lots of information there about the ruler program, as well as a lot of literature, etc., that supports the topic we've been discussing today. Well, with that, I want to thank our three terrific speakers, Jennifer Nandu, Michael Halpert, and Mark Brackett, for a wonderful discussion, kicking us off on a new school year with real hope that we can build health into schools in a very holistic and integrated way. I want to thank the audience for joining us on this Google Hangout today, and I hope you'll join us for our next Hangout on October 2, when we turn to the subject of nursing and building a culture of health. Thanks again for all who participated, those of you who tweeted us your questions, and we'll hope to see you again on the future Hangouts. Meanwhile, have a great day.
Thank you very much.